That night, right in the middle of a ballroom of 250 guests, the spotlight slammed straight into my face like it was exposing a criminal, and my son, wearing a Lancaster suit worth $2,800, held the mic, smirked, and said the line that made the entire room explode in laughter. My dad showed up to the party, but don't worry, he didn't pay for a single thing in this room. The crowd murmured, "Ohio old man looks exactly like blue-collar labor, small business loser," and someone even lifted their phone to film my face up close, like they were recording an animal cornered at the back of a cage. I walked up, gave him a hug cold as steel, then left the room in silence, letting the whole world witness the moment a father was publicly humiliated by his own son on a live stream of over 60,000 viewers. If you've ever felt your own blood turn you into a joke for strangers, ever tasted the kind of pain no doctor can numb, leave a "so I know you understand." And if you want to follow the stories where justice arrives through clarity, through silence, through dignity, I'd be grateful if you subscribed, so the next story can find the people who carry the same wound. Some beginnings are so small, people don't see the value in them. A damp old garage in Euclid, Ohio, a cold freight truck from 1978 that was close to failing inspection, and two people who were only 24 but carried the kind of stubbornness the world calls crazy, and Margaret. In 1986, we signed the mortgage on the small house her parents had given as a wedding gift. The paper sat in front of us. The pen shook in my hand, like it knew it was about to tie us to a road with no way back. The bank didn't believe in us. They said a young couple with no experience running cold chain logistics was suicidal. But Margaret looked at me under the warm yellow light, her eyes holding a belief the entire world couldn't buy from her. "We can do this, Richard," she said, her hand on mine. "Yeah, we can do this," I sighed. That garage, the place where Hale Cold Chain Logistics began, was cold, dark, and so small that every time we opened the door, dust fell like snow. But it was there that I stacked our first crates, set the temperatures myself, did my own maintenance, and drove across the Midwest alone. 16 hours a day, sometimes 18. I remember the sound of the tires grinding on winter highways at night, the low hum of the freezer unit behind me, and the burnt coffee smell from the silver thermos Margaret shoved into my hands every night shift. "Drive safe, Rich. I've got no one to argue with if something happens to you," she joked every morning. We were poor, but we were never miserable. The house was small, but the kitchen was always warm. The worn wooden table was where we counted every dollar, split every bill, but also where we sketched dreams, bigger than both of us. Then in 1989, Aaron was born. I've never forgotten that day, though my memory has stored tens of thousands of miles and thousands of routes since. Euclid Hospital was bright white, the halls carrying the faint smell of antiseptic. When the nurse placed that tiny red newborn in my arms, he let out a cry strong enough to make the whole room seem to echo. Margaret was so exhausted she couldn't open her eyes, but her lips curved into a small smile. I looked at my son, his fingers curled inward, gripping my shirt, and like someone pulling an invisible cord tight across my chest, I knew instantly my life was no longer mine alone. "Son," I said softly, afraid to startle him, "I'll leave everything to you. Everything." I don't know how many times I repeated that promise later in life, but that was the first time. And it was the promise that, for almost 30 years afterward, I truly believed I would keep completely. The 1990s were our golden years, not because we were wealthy, but because we were happy. The company slowly gathered more clients, small grocery stores, family restaurants, and then a few regional retail chains. Margaret handled the books, and I drove the routes and negotiated the contracts. On long hauls across Route 71, Route 90, on snow-heavy nights where the headlights cut through white fog, I drove and wished only to get home fast enough to see Aaron grow a little more. Our small kitchen always smelled like pot roast every Sunday. It was Margaret's best dish, and the one that made our boy run circles around the sofa every time he heard the oven beep. On nights I came home early, I'd carry Aaron out to the backyard, show him the stars, teach him the difference between the Lake Erie wind and the faraway rumble of trains a few blocks down. I took him to watch the Cleveland Indians. Every loss made him cry. Every win made him scream louder than me. Those were the years when just sitting beside him on cold wooden bleachers, his hand inside mine, felt like nothing in the world could break what we had. Business grew. The old garage could no longer hold everything. In 1993, I rent out an old cold storage warehouse from a bankrupt supermarket on the outskirts of Cleveland. It was dim, with yellow lights and cold vapor drifting like condensed mist. But to me, it was a palace. I lifted 4-year-old Aaron into my arms, stood in the middle of the metal shelving aisles, and listened to the compressor hum steady as a heartbeat. "You hear that?" I asked. He nodded. "That's your future." He didn't understand. A 4-year-old can't. But he wrapped his arms around my neck and rested his head on my shoulder. And in that moment, under the weak yellow lighting and the soft white cold, I felt like I'd done something right with my life. I believed he would grow up inside that cold air, inside the values I poured my youth into: hard work, humility, and gratitude. And I believed that someday he would walk into the company not as an heir, but as a partner. For the first 20 years of Aaron's life, between warm dinners, long drives along Lake Erie, and the times he ran after the freight truck when I was about to leave, I never imagined the world would shift in ways I couldn't comprehend, that the things I protected and passed on would one day be shattered by a single sentence, a single laugh in front of a crowd, and by the cold eyes of the very son I once promised to give everything to. But that is a story for years later. For now, 1993, inside the old cold storage warehouse, under the dim yellow bulbs and the white breath of the machines, I was holding Aaron, the boy giggling as the cold brushed his face, his dark, round eyes identical to Margaret's. And I, Richard Hale, had no idea I was creating the most beautiful memory, and the last one I would ever be able to keep pure before everything changed color. People think the collapse of a family happens in a single moment, one sentence, one party, one insult that can't be taken back. But the truth is different. Cracks always start from small things, very small things, subtle enough that no one notices until the entire wall caves in. For Aaron, and the first cracks began after 2007, the year he was accepted into the finance program at Ohio State University. I still remember the day the acceptance letter arrived. Aaron ran into the house, waving it as if he had just won a world championship. Margaret hugged him, eyes wet with happiness. And me. I stood by the stove, watching the two of them, feeling my chest clench with joy and worry at the same time. 4 years of finance at Ohio State didn't come cheap. Tuition, housing, textbooks, living expenses, altogether around $160,000. Money that, if invested into expanding the cold chain, could have bought 2 new refrigerated trucks and a full handling line. But when Aaron looked at me, eyes filled with the same hope he had when he followed me into the cold storage at age 4, I knew I couldn't say no. "You just focus on studying," I said. "I'll take care of the rest." Margaret placed her hand on my shoulder. "Richard, you never refuse anything good for our son, do you?" I laughed. I had never refused anything. 4 years of college went by fast. Aaron grew into a tall, confident, polite young man. He studied well, earned a partial scholarship in his final year, and called me every Sunday night to talk about classes, friends, and the career fairs the school hosted. But sometimes I heard something in his voice. Not exactly arrogance, but enough for me to sense a difference from what I was used to. "Dad, I met some consultants in Columbus. And they said if you want to succeed, you have to start in an office, not in a cold warehouse. Doing manual work is outdated. I smiled, trying to keep my voice calm. Every job has value if you do it honestly. I climbed up from loading crates, and that's why this company still stands today. Aaron was silent. He didn't argue, but I knew he didn't fully agree. Even so, at that time, our relationship was still good. He still called me old man when teasing, still hugged me every time he came home, and still helped Margaret pick vegetables when she cooked dinner. We still went out to Lake Erie whenever we had time, casting lines and talking nonsense about everything under the sun. I had no idea that those afternoons, between the waves hitting the rocks and the sunset spreading gold on the water, would be the last moments of perfect peace the two of us shared. In 2014, Aaron graduated. When he walked down the stadium steps holding his diploma, face glowing, I hugged him tightly. Margaret stood beside us, smiling with tear-filled eyes. "Now you're really coming into the company," I said. "But I'm not letting you start in the office," I added, half joking, half serious. "I know. You're making me start in the cold warehouse. I haven't forgotten." Aaron laughed, winking. I built a special program for him, from cold storage to the office. First 3 months, cold storage, ride with the trucks, learn to scan barcodes. Next 6 months, operations, route handling, load optimization. 1 year later, supply chain assistant. Only then could he sit in a coordinator's office. He did well, very well. Sharp, logical, confident, well liked by many older employees because he was respectful. But even then, I began noticing something. He liked wearing suits more than thermal jackets, liked meetings more than warehouse checks, liked being called supervisor more than coordinator. Small things. But as I said, all cracks begin with small things. By 2017, our life, still calm, still steady, suddenly shifted. Margaret had persistent stomach pain. I thought it was digestive trouble. But when she started losing weight quickly, we went to the Cleveland Clinic. The white hallways, the clinical lights, the smell of disinfectant, those things haunt me as a warning I failed to understand. When the doctor walked in with a grave expression, I knew, even before he opened his mouth. Pancreatic carcinoma, late stage. I heard Margaret exhale sharply, as if she'd been pushed backward by wind. Aaron stood beside her, clutching her hand until his knuckles turned white. I felt nothing, not because I was strong, but because the fear cracked so violently inside me that every thought collapsed into a void. Every week after that was another hospital, another round of chemo, another hope, then another broken one. I cared for Margaret while trying to keep the company from falling apart. Aaron moved home temporarily, trying to take care of his mother in the evenings, but the fear and exhaustion slowly crept into his eyes. In those nights of harsh antiseptic smell burning my eyes, in those long white corridors that felt endless, I realized something clearly. Everything I thought I could control was no longer in my hands. The day Margaret died, spring of 2018, Ohio suddenly turned cold, even though the calendar said May. Aaron and I sat on either side of her hospital bed. She was so weak, her breath was barely a thread. Margaret opened her eyes. They were the same as the night we signed the mortgage in 1986, warm, deep, full of trust. "Richard," she whispered, "keep Aaron close. Don't let him drift." Those were the final words of Margaret Hale. I held her hand for a long time, until it grew cold under the hospital lights. Aaron buried his face in my shoulder, crying like the little boy I once carried into the cold warehouse. From that moment on, my promise was no longer just for Aaron. It was also for Margaret, a promise I believed I had to keep at all costs. I never knew. That very promise would become the rope binding me in all the years that followed, years in which I failed to see that my only son had already begun drifting out of orbit, stepping into another world where the values I spent my life building were no longer bright enough. In 2021, when COVID had just eased and the logistics sector was starting to recover, Aaron flew to Florida for the Regional Cold Chain Summit. I thought it was just a normal work trip where my son would meet a few new suppliers, a few coastal carriers, maybe bring back some summer contracts. I didn't know that was where everything would start to change color. Aaron called home on the second night of the conference. His voice was more excited than usual, but with something brighter, sharper, like the glow of luxury hotels I'd never stepped into. Dad, I met someone interesting. Sienna Lancaster. She works in the supply chain division of Lancaster Textiles. I knew Lancaster Textile. Who in the American transport industry didn't? 40 years of luxury textile, a national distribution network, tens of millions in annual revenue spanning from New York to Charlotte. It was old money, polished, private, conservative, and very selective. Lancaster, huh? I asked. Yeah. She was on the main panel, even shook hands with some of the big CEOs. His voice was full of admiration. Back then, I still smiled, still thought a smart girl could be good for him. I just didn't foresee that the world Sienna carried, the world of crystal chandeliers, charity galas, French champagne, and 12-course dinners, would open a door Aaron would step through and never want to return from. When he came back to Ohio, Aaron had changed noticeably, not badly at first, just different. He came home less. Our Sunday dinners, a 30-year tradition, became, Dad, I'm busy this week. Then Dad, I have to be in New York this weekend. Then Dad, I'm meeting someone in Boston. Once a month, then not even once. When I asked, he just laughed. Don't worry, Dad, I'm expanding my network. But there was something small, very small, that only a father notices. Whenever he said the words network, his eyes lit up in a way that cared more about status than work. One June evening, Aaron brought Sienna home for dinner. I made pot roast, the dish Margaret used to cook, the one Aaron loved as a child. But the moment she stepped inside, I felt something in the air. Not hostility, not discomfort, but appraisal. Sienna stood at the door, looking around my wooden house of 30 years. Her eyes didn't rest. They skimmed each object as if assessing it, pricing it, or downpricing it. Margaret's painting on the wall? Oh, very vintage. The wooden dining set. Where did you get this? It's quaint. The word quaint floated out, light as a feather, but sharp enough for me to hear the gap between our worlds. I didn't blame her. She grew up in a multi-million-dollar Long Island estate. She probably wasn't used to homes like mine. But that look, that quiet condescension, made me remember the first time Margaret walked into my house in 1986. She looked at everything with warmth and affection, not an appraisal, not even once. During dinner, Sienna tapped her fork lightly and asked me things like, do you think your company should be more modernized? Do you plan to expand to the East Coast or just stay this small? What's your storage temperature? Ours meets European standards. The way she said small and your made it clear where she drew the invisible line. Aaron looked at her like every word she said was gold, and that was when I began to worry. Then when her father, Gregory Lancaster, invited us to Boston for a weekend, I understood clearly the class they lived in. Lancaster residence was so large that it took me nearly 3 minutes to walk the hallway to the living room. Austrian crystal chandeliers, Moroccan carpets, and Italian sculptures in every corner. That world was not mine. And worse, I saw how quickly Aaron fit into it. When Gregory shook my hand, he looked me up and down with the kind of gaze used to judge whether a product met spec. People like him didn't need to speak to show disdain. Their eyes did the work. Mr. Hale, he said slowly, I hear your company is very hard-working. Just those 2 words, very hard-working, sounded exactly like very pitiful. That night, I saw Aaron sitting with the Lancasters on the patio, drinking Bordeaux and discussing investment, expansion, and optimizing a national transport network. The way he leaned back, the way he smiled, the way he swirled his glass. He no longer looked like the boy who once ate pot roast with me under a white-painted wooden roof. That trip lasted only 2 days, but the distance between Aaron and me after it stretched as far as from Ohio to Boston. Then came other trips, the Hamptons, Miami, Boston again. Each time he returned, he was busier, colder, and further. I knew that when someone changes their circle, they change what they want to belong to. But watching your only child slide away from the values you spent your entire life building is a feeling I don't know how to name. All I know is that from 2021 onward, every time I stood in the dim house and heard the door close behind Aaron as he left, something familiar in me, something once very solid, began to shake. And I had no idea that Sienna Lancaster's arrival was only the polite greeting of the coming storm. People say loneliness comes from missing someone, but there is another kind of loneliness, the kind where the person you love is standing right in front of you, yet their eyes no longer belong to you. And that kind is what makes a house feel painfully wider. The 2 years after the Lancaster family appeared were 2 years of the Euclid house slowly becoming a place, with nothing but the clock ticking and the wind slipping through the doorframe. On the first New Year's Day, out of habit, I cooked a pot roast, set 2 chairs facing each other, one for me, one for Aaron, right where Margaret used to sit. I even put out the red napkin she loved every New Year. But 8 o'clock passed, then 9, then 10, and the only sound in the house was the clock, striking each second like it was striking my chest. Aaron texted at 10:20. "Dad, I'm in Boston with Sienna's family. You eat first." I stared at the words, then at the empty chair. For the first time in my life, I felt like someone left behind. Not because my son was busy, but because he was living a different life, one where I was no longer on the priority list. Thanksgiving that year, Christmas that year, the New Year after, every one of them was the same. Me sitting alone at the dinner table, 2 chairs across from me, one empty for Margaret, one empty for Aaron. People say losing a loved one is the worst pain, but worse is being treated by your own blood as an obstacle, a responsibility they need to manage, not as family anymore. In those 2 years, Aaron came only 4 times. 4, and never more than 25 minutes each visit. Every time he kept glancing at his watch, like staying 1 extra minute would make him miss some important social guest in Boston or the Hamptons. One November evening, he showed up unannounced. I was so happy I instinctively stood up to make coffee, thinking the 2 of us would talk like before. But the moment I set the 2 cups on the table, he said, colder than the air in the cold room, "Dad, our company. If it doesn't change, it won't keep up with the market. You need to learn to let someone else run it. You're outdated." That last word dropped like a slap, not across the face, but right onto the trust I'd spent my whole life building for him. I never imagined the day my own son, raised on 16-hour routes and cold room shifts, would look me in the eye and declare me outdated, like an old piece of equipment. I tried to stay calm. "Who told you that?" He shrugged. But his eyes, those eyes no longer belonged to the boy who once cried over his mother's death. "Dad, you need to open up more. Everyone's doing mergers to scale. Gregory says a friendly deal would take us to the next level." The way he said next level sounded like he believed I, his father, was at some low rung he needed to climb past to match the Lancaster family. I looked at my son. I looked for a long time. And in that moment, I realized something I had always refused to admit. A part of Aaron had stepped to the other side of the table, the side with crystal chandeliers, Bordeaux wine, yachts, and the half-smiles the Lancasters gave me like I was some bargain bin item. But I kept my voice slow, soft, like I used to when pulling him away from mistakes back when he was 15. "Aaron, I'm not outdated. I just want things safe. We're a family business, you know that." He sighed, leaned back, crossed his arms, exactly like Gregory Lancaster. Dad, you really don't get it. There's no place anymore for small-time operations like yours. If a stranger had said that, I would have ignored it. But my son said it. The son I paid $160,000 for at Ohio State. The son I carried into the cold room at 4 years old and told, "This is your future." The son Margaret, in her final breath, had told me, "Keep Aaron close. Don't let him lose his way." That promise was the only reason I swallowed everything I wanted to say. I wanted to tell him Gregory was using him as a pawn. I wanted to tell him a friendly merger with the Lancasters meant Hale would lose everything. I wanted to tell him that if I was outdated, then it was these outdated hands that paid for the degree he bragged about. But all I said was, "Yeah, do what you think is best." Because the only thing I feared more than losing the company was losing the only child I had left. In the evenings after that, when I locked the cold room, the chill on the back of my neck felt like a warning. The yellow light spilling onto the stained concrete looked just like it had the day I first carried Aaron into that cold room. Except back then, the cold stood for the future. Now, it felt like it was showing me the shape of a collapse coming near. And when I looked at the 2 empty chairs on every holiday, I understood that the distance between a father and a son isn't measured in years, but in the number of dinners one of them no longer wants to come home for. A 31-year-old family company doesn't collapse because of one big mistake. It usually starts with a harmless meeting, a survey document, a phone call that seems ordinary but drags the entire future of the business behind it. And for me, everything started with the notification chime coming from Aaron's room on a Tuesday night. His light was on even though he told me he'd be at the gym. I walked past the hallway and heard a Zoom microphone echoing through the crack under his door. Gregory Lancaster's voice was sharp enough to feel cold. "Aaron, share your screen. Kaplan is waiting." I froze. Kaplan. I knew that name. A New York M&A attorney who specialized in swallowing small and mid-sized businesses for old money northeastern corporations. A man who never chatted casually unless the people on the other side were about to lose their company. Aaron said something, then clicked. The screen light spilled through the door gap, enough for me to see the bold letters on the first page. Hale Lancaster Integration, Phase 1, Asset Consolidation. My heart felt like someone squeezed it with both hands. Integration? Asset consolidation? Those aren't words people use in friendly conversation. Those are takeover words. I stepped back from the door, not because I was afraid of being noticed, but because I knew if I heard one more sentence, I wouldn't stay calm enough to handle it. The next morning, after Aaron left early to meet a partner, I walked straight into his home office. Not sneaking, I was the owner. The laptop used the company domain. The desk sat inside the cold storage warehouse I built. I had the right and the responsibility. Aaron had left the laptop open on the desk. I woke it up. The company email logged in automatically. It took me only 3 minutes to see what I never wanted to see. Every confidential file of Hale Cold Chain Logistics. Route maps, cost of goods, hourly temperature drop data, refrigerated truck maintenance logs, strategic client lists, all forwarded from Aaron's email to glancaster.althexgroup.com and mkaplanmergers.com. Not one file, 32 files, every single one. This wasn't accidentally sent. This was a severe NDA breach. I sat down. The leather chair felt cold, not because of the room's temperature, but because my blood felt like it was draining out of me. Nothing hurts like realizing the person you trusted most is the one opening the door for someone else to take everything you built. I opened his documents folder, an Excel file, dozens of sheets. I clicked. The first line hit me like a punch. Projected takeover timeline. Hale Division, full integration by Q4. I scrolled. A section spelled it out. Role allocation post-merger. Aaron Hale, Regional Operations Lead, non-equity. I read it 3 times. Non-equity. No ownership. What did it mean? It meant my son, the only person I ever expected to inherit the company, would, after this friendly merger, become a mid-level employee with no stake, no say, and no place in the long-term strategy. Translation, they would swallow the company and swallow him with it. Worse, Aaron didn't know. He thought he would become a Lancaster man, a future VP, a pillar of the family. But to Gregory, he was a placeholder, a decorative credential, a bow on the acquisition. I closed the laptop. My fingertips felt like the metal racks inside the cold room. I understood one thing. I couldn't handle this alone, and there was only one person I trusted. Rachel Donner, 60 years old, former litigator from a Chicago firm, the woman who saved me 3 times from commercial disputes in the early aughts. I called her. No introduction. Rachel, I need to meet. Now. At 7 that night, in her small Cleveland office, I told her everything. No cover. No excuses for my son. Rachel listened, removed her glasses, folded her arms, leaned back. Richard, hear me very clearly. You are about to be acquired, and not the fair kind. This is the kind where the other side uses your own family to open the door. I swallowed hard. Rachel continued. I need 2 things from you. 1. Audit every email, device, and document Aaron touched in the last 6 months. You own the company. The domain is yours. It's legal. 2. Do not ask your son anything. Do not let him know you discovered this. If the Lancasters sense it, they will move to price crushing. I nodded, but my voice was low. Rachel, that's my son. Rachel looked straight into me. Her eyes were cold but not unkind. I know, but right now, Richard, you need to protect the company first. If not, you will lose both, the company and your son. That sentence tightened something in my chest. I wasn't afraid of losing the company. I once lived in a garage in 1986, and I could start over if I had to. But losing Aaron, losing the one child Margaret made me promise to keep close, was something I didn't know if I could survive. I returned to the cold room at 10 that night. The compressors hummed, and mist rose off the frozen floor. I stood in the middle of the warehouse, the place that held all my happiest memories with Aaron, and understood that from this moment forward, everything had changed. I looked up at the old yellow lights. That light used to be a symbol of hope the day I carried Aaron into the cold room when he was 4. But tonight, the light changed color. It wasn't the light of the future. It was the light of a war in which my own son was unknowingly standing on the opposite side. After leaving Aaron's office with the USB that held enough evidence to shred any excuse, I drove home in absolute silence. Everything I had read on his laptop, the integration files, the emails to Gregory, the numbers marking the end of 30 years of work, spun in my head like a frozen wheel stuck in ice. But what hurt most was not the leaked data. It was the brutal truth. Aaron had stepped into a world I never belonged to, and he was slowly learning to look at me with the eyes of the people in that world. Cold, grading, appraising, categorizing. That night, I sat in the dark kitchen without turning on the lights, staring at the wooden table Margaret used for pot roast every Sunday. I thought maybe it was all a misunderstanding. Maybe some part of Aaron still saw me as his father. But then my phone buzzed. His message lit up the screen. Dad, remember to come early Saturday. Big party. Don't bring anything. Everything's taken care of. A simple sentence, but every word carried something foreign. A kind of coldness I had never heard in my son's voice. I stared at the message for a long time, then set the phone down. I didn't know the night at the Grand Horizon Ballroom would shatter the last illusions left in me. I only knew this. When a father walks into a room hoping to see his son happy, and that room uses its own lights, sound, and laughter to tear apart his dignity, then it is no longer a birthday party. It is the funeral of fatherhood. And I, foolish, still stepped into that place with empty hands and a heart full of hope. That night, When I walked into the Grand Horizon Ballroom, it felt like stepping into a world that did not belong to me. 250 guests, blinding crystal chandeliers, cameras humming from 3 corners of the room, a wall-sized LED screen, and a sound system strong enough to catch every breath on stage. My son's 34th birthday party looked less like a birthday and more like a tycoon-level gala. I stood near the edge of the room, unnoticed. People passing by glanced at me for a second before turning back to their glasses of Dom Perignon. As I stood there, a man walking past said loudly, "Who invited the guy who looks like a truck driver?" On stage, the MC held a mic, his voice booming through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the future Lancaster son-in-law, the rising star of the logistics world, Aaron Lancaster. Oh, wait, Aaron Hale." The whole room erupted in laughter, the kind of laughter people use when they think they're watching a comedy act, not a birthday party. Gregory Lancaster sat in the VIP row. He lifted his wine glass, eyes sharp as a blade, then stepped onto the stage. "Today," Gregory said, his voice hitting like metal on metal, "we celebrate a man who chose to enter a family of the right caliber. Because as you all know, some people contribute, some just attend and pretend they matter." The laughter rose. A woman covered her mouth and whispered to her friend, "Pretty sure he means that guy in the cheap suit down there." Gregory handed the mic to Aaron. The spotlight landed entirely on my son. Aaron raised his glass, smiling with an edge sharp enough to cut. "Thank you all for coming, and thank you to the Lancaster family for sponsoring almost this entire magnificent party." Applause. Champagne lifted high. I knew whatever came next would be bad, but I didn't imagine it would be this cruel. Aaron looked straight at me and said, "Because, you know, this party is hosted by my future father-in-law. My dad couldn't even afford a candle for this cake." Then he laughed, a laugh exploding through the speakers, every syllable hitting my chest like a hammer. The ballroom burst into louder laughter, but this time it wasn't just laughter. A man shouted, "Ohio old man, too cheap to buy candles?" A group of 3 women live-streamed right in front of me, their camera pointed directly at my face. "OMG, look at his expression. Totally that broke but trying to look fancy vibe." The spotlight suddenly swept down to where I stood, so bright I could see every dust particle floating in the air. And at that exact moment, the LED screen behind the stage auto-switched, displaying a photo of me holding Aaron in the cold room in 1993. A beautiful photo, full of father-son devotion, yet under tonight's lighting, it became material for mockery. Someone looked up at the screen and said, "God, look at that. Total blue-collar energy. Doesn't fit here at all." Another laughed. "He probably thinks this is some small company year-end party." A tuxedoed guest slapped his friend's shoulder, snickering. "Can't afford candles, but walks into a room with $400 bottles. Doesn't know his place." The laughter sliced through me like scissors on skin. An AI autofocus camera locked onto my face, and the small DJ screen displayed, "Guest reaction cam, father." The entire room howled again because my face, wide-eyed, stunned, hurting, was on display. I wanted to walk out, but my legs felt nailed to the carpet. A group of men near the aisle said loudly, "His dad's probably calculating how much candles cost so he doesn't have to pay." Another replied, "That's how Erie Shore small business guys are." I set down my glass. It clinked because my hand shook. I walked toward the stage. My footsteps on the stairs sounded like metal, dropping onto a freezer floor. Aaron looked at me and tried to force a smile, but I could tell he didn't want this. I hugged him, a hug cold as the steel racks in the cold room, and while I hugged him, someone behind me muttered, "Look," hugging him like he's begging for money. I exhaled one sentence, "Happy birthday." Then I turned away. The ballroom dissolved into laughter again, chairs scraping, music returning. As I stepped down the stairs, a live streamer moved closer and said into her camera, loud and clear, "This is what happens when you raise a son above your tax bracket." I pushed the door open. It closed behind me, shutting out the music, but not the laughter. And I knew, in that moment, not only my dignity had been thrown onto the floor, but the entire 31 years of work I built had just been kicked aside by the very son I created. I walked out of the Grand Horizon Ballroom in silence, but inside me was a storm pounding through every vein. The Cleveland night was freezing. The road stretched out ahead like a strip of black ice. I climbed into my old Ford F-150 and slammed the door so hard the window glass trembled. As the truck rolled away from the hotel, the laughter from the ballroom clung to my back, echoing through every pulse in my skull. I drove across the Detroit Shoreway Bridge, past dark rows of houses, past streetlights casting thin strands of yellow that barely held me together. But when the truck turned into the industrial district along Lake Erie, the route I had driven for cold chain deliveries for decades, I couldn't hold myself together anymore. I hit the brakes. The truck jerked to a stop, and I broke. I dropped my head against the steering wheel. My chest tightened like someone was crushing it from the inside. I couldn't breathe. Then, unable to hold it back, I slammed my fist into the steering wheel. Once, twice, 3 times. The heavy metallic thud echoed through the cabin, mixing with my ragged breaths, as if the entire truck were witnessing the final collapse of a father. I hadn't cried since Margaret died, but tonight the tears burst out like 30 years had been forced through a pinhole and finally exploded. I covered my face with both hands, my body shaking. Margaret's eyes flashed through my memory, those eyes that once looked at me with absolute trust. And then her final words came back, sharp as metal, despite how soft they had sounded the day she said them. Don't let him get lost. Her voice had been faint, fragile, yet tonight it cut like a blade. I swallowed hard. I tried, Maggie. I whispered into the empty air. I tried to keep him close, for the past 3 years. But the image of Aaron standing under that spotlight, laughing at my humiliation, saying my dad couldn't even afford a candle, replayed in my head like a corrupted audio loop. I wondered, maybe my son had been lost long before tonight, and I simply refused to see it. I looked into the rear-view mirror. A 63-year-old man stared back, face reddened from crying, eyes swollen and wet, hair half-gray blending into the dark cabin. A father who had fought the whole world to protect his only child, only for that child to use his new world to crush him in front of 250 people. Suddenly, amid all that chaos, something cold settled inside me. Cold like the freezer air back in 1986, the cold I once feared, then used to build a company worth more than $6 million. A cold that made my mind clearer, straighter, still. I murmured to myself, my voice hoarse but firm like a verdict. He chose his world, and I have to choose my life. The truth was harsh but unmistakable, like the yellow glow inside the cold room in 1993. I could not save Aaron anymore. I could not save someone who didn't want to be saved. I could not hold on to someone who had chosen the opposite side. I could not spend whatever breath I had left chasing after a child who had become a man and chose to treat his father like a joke. I sat up straight, wiped my face with my sleeve, took a long, steady breath. For the first time in years, I felt something even fatherhood could not soften anymore. The instinct to survive. Not survive hunger or cold, but survive the destruction coming from someone I loved. I reached for my phone on the passenger seat. The screen blurred because my hands still shook. I opened my messages, tapped the name of the one person who could stand with me in the war ahead. Rachel Donner, a woman sharp as a blade, cold as Lake Erie in January, and more loyal to the truth than anyone I've ever known. My fingers typed one sentence: activate plan black ice. A short message, but for me, it marked the moment a 34-year bond shattered, and the moment Richard Hale, the soft-hearted father, died. While Richard Hale, the the man who once faced the cold alone to raise his son, came back to life. I hit send. The screen showed delivered. I leaned my head against the seat, listening to the soft hum of the AC, listening to my heartbeat, slow, knowing that from tonight on, I was no longer the father who chased after his son. I was the man who would protect himself, even if the price was splitting my soul in half. The message, "Activate Plan Black Ice," was sent at 1:14 a.m. At 1:27, Rachel Donner replied with exactly one sentence. 9 a.m. tomorrow. My office. No one can know. I turned off my phone and sat in the dark cabin of the F-150, the industrial cold drifting out from the neighboring warehouses, reminding me that every major battle of my life had begun in the cold. The next morning, Rachel's office in the Cleveland Financial District still carried the familiar scent of polished walnut and old paper. I told her everything, the ballroom and what I found on Aaron's laptop. Rachel stood, locked the door, pulled the shades. "Richard," she said, eyes unblinking, "it's time you understand this. If you want to live, you have to leave Ohio. And to leave, you have to pull the plug on the entire structure Aaron is clinging to." I nodded. Rachel opened her laptop, typing fast, sharp as hammer strikes on steel. "I'm not giving Lancaster any room to contest anything. We sell 80% of the company, but we sell to the right place, the right price, the right legal structure." She showed me a blue file with the logo of Pacific Harvest Logistics Group, a Seattle-based maritime logistics conglomerate that buys small cold chain companies and preserves their brand for 3 years to secure a smooth transition. Rachel said, "They've wanted a Midwest foothold since last year. This deal will close in 21 days if you greenlight it." I asked, "What do I tell Aaron?" Rachel looked at me, her gaze razor sharp, but with a trace of mercy. "Nothing. All due diligence happens in my office, not at Hale Cold Chain Logistics. I'll have Pacific Harvest sign the highest level NDA, and the audit team will enter under the pretext of an insurance compliance review, a normal procedure for a cold transport carrier. Aaron won't suspect a thing." I stayed quiet a few seconds. "And his position?" Rachel slowly turned the screen toward me. Clause 11 of the LOI draft appeared. "Buyer requires immediate termination of Mr. Aaron Hale due to conflict of interest and breach of confidentiality, as evidenced by email trails and NDA violations." My chest tightened. "Meaning," Rachel nodded, "meaning they have the right to refuse any personnel tied to an internal scandal. And Aaron's emails to Kaplan are a legally valid NDA violation. Pacific Harvest won't touch the risk." I looked down at my hands. The same hands that lifted Aaron off the ground when he fell at 4 years old on the Cleveland Indians field. The same hands now required to sign his termination. Rachel continued, her voice low, sharp as a blade. "Richard, you're not firing him. His actions are firing him." I took a long breath. "And the Lakeshore condo?" Rachel lifted a brow. "You intended it for Aaron?" I shook my head. "No, not anymore." Rachel typed a few lines. "Legal advice. Transfer it before the sale announcement, but with a legitimate reason, not to dodge litigation." I asked, "What reason counts as legitimate?" Rachel smiled faintly, the smile of someone who has handled hundreds of estates. "Early inheritance. Do you have a trustworthy niece?" I thought. "Natalie, 28, my sister's daughter, a teacher." "Good," Rachel said. "Reason. Home purchase support. Early inheritance. Perfectly legal. You'll transfer the condo, $480,000 to her, and because it's a personal asset, not tied to the company, no one can contest it." We spent the entire morning assembling the timeline. Day 1. Rachel sends a discreet email to Pacific Harvest's CEO, kickstarting the deal. Days 2 to 4. The 3-person audit team arrives at Rachel's office, not my cold warehouse, and conducts due diligence on electronic documents Rachel provides. She requires them to sign an 18-page NDA including a clause forbidding any contact or disclosure to Hale Cold Chain personnel. Days 5 to 6, Pacific Harvest returns evaluation. The number on the screen made me lean back in my chair. Valuation $6.8 million. Proposed purchase 80%, $5.44 million. I couldn't speak. Rachel whispered, "You deserve more, but for a family business, this is a number few ever see." Days 7 to 14. Pacific Harvest cross-checks email metadata, a required step when the buyer must confirm there's no litigation risk. Rachel explained, "They will see Aaron's emails to Gregory and Kaplan. That's all they need to justify excluding him. They don't need the details." Days 15 to 17. Contract drafting. Days 18 to 21. Signing, disbursement, file closure, personnel restructuring. Rachel keyed the final line into the timeline, then looked up. "After closing, you have 30 days to leave Ohio before Lancaster gets wind of it." I leaned back. A chill slid down my spine, not the chill of despair, but the chill of clarity. Rachel rested her hands on the desk and delivered the final words of the meeting. "Richard, you've lived your whole life for your son. Now it's time to live for yourself." I left her office at dusk. The Cleveland winter sky was gray as sheet metal. I walked along Euclid Avenue, the same street where 38 years ago, Margaret and I drove around looking for a garage to start the company. Each step felt like cutting one more cord, tying me to my past. That evening, I called Natalie. I told her everything. No softening, no hiding. She cried. "Uncle, you didn't deserve any of this." I answered, "Everyone gets to choose, kiddo. I'm choosing to give you this condo, not because I'm running from anything, but because I want to give someone a gift I know won't betray me." Natalie said one sentence, one that tightened my throat. "I'll keep that condo the way I'd keep a piece of Aunt Margaret's heart." I signed the transfer papers the next day. When I stepped out of the notary office, I stood on the sidewalk, looking at Lake Erie under a thin veil of mist. A strange feeling spread in my chest, not happiness, but lightness, a kind of lightness I hadn't felt in years, like walking without dragging an entire building behind me. And when I climbed into the truck, Rachel texted, "Pacific Harvest approved the offer. Prepare for Phase 2. No turning back." I looked at the streetlights reflecting off the windshield, yellow, trembling like the freezer haze back in 1993. One cycle was closing, a new one was opening, and I, the man who just lost his son, was about to reclaim his own life. 9 a.m., the conference room at McAllister and Donner was flooded with cold white light like an operating theater. I sat at the head of the long walnut table, facing the CEO of Pacific Harvest Logistics Group and their legal team. Rachel sat beside me, her face calm enough to make it seem like she was reviewing an ordinary quarterly report. A stack of files nearly 3 inches thick sat in front of me. Rachel slid the final contract to the edge of the table. "Sign it, Richard." I picked up the pen. No shaking, no hesitation, no words. The signature, Richard Hale, slid across the page like a cold blade cutting the last cord binding me to my old life. 9:17 a.m. Hale Cold Chain. Logistics officially became 80% owned by Pacific Harvest. $5,440,000 hit my escrow account immediately. And Clause 14, termination of Mr. Aaron. Hale with cause due to breach of confidentiality, went active. No sound, no fireworks. No one shook my hand. Rachel only said, "It's done." She said it like a surgeon announcing a successful operation, with the patient still in recovery. I left the office without looking back. Cleveland that morning felt like a different city, colder, emptier, wider, or maybe I was the one who had changed. At 2 p.m., while I was in my old kitchen packing my last box, my phone buzzed nonstop, but I didn't need to look to know who it was. Aaron. But I had decided today I was no longer the weak man chasing his son's shadow. I let the phone ring. Across the city at Hale Cold Chain Logistics, a storm was breaking. Fidel at reception told me every detail the following week. Aaron drove his new Mercedes into the lot and froze when he saw it packed with gray SUVs, bearing small Pacific Harvest decals on their windshields. A new security guard waved him down. "What do you need, sir?" Aaron snapped. "I'm the operations director. I work here." The guard checked his iPad list, frowning. "Your name is no longer on the authorized personnel roster." Aaron laughed under his breath. "Are you kidding me?" He walked past the guard, ignoring him, but on the third floor, where management offices were, his office door was locked. Not the old lock, a completely new one. He banged on the door. "Who's in there?" A man around 45 opened it. Gray suit, purple tie, the posture of a seasoned M&A envoy. "You're Aaron Hale?" Aaron answered. "Yeah, this is my office." The man lifted a tablet. A PDF appeared with a crisp title. Termination with cause, effective immediately. He read slowly, each word landing like a nail. "You are hereby terminated effective immediately for breach of confidentiality, unauthorized sharing of internal data with a third party, and conflicts of interest during potential negotiations. This decision is executed by Pacific Harvest Logistics Group, the new majority owner of Hale Cold Chain Logistics." Aaron's mouth fell open. "What? No. No way. My father would never?" The representative cut him off. "Mr. Hale signed the sale at 9:17 a.m. this morning. Under the contract, Pacific Harvest may terminate you without his approval." Aaron staggered back like he'd been slapped. I want to speak to my dad." The man offered a polite but cold smile. "You may call him. According to the log here, he has not answered 18 of your calls." Behind him, 2 security officers stepped forward. "Sir," one said, "we'll walk with you to collect your personal items." Aaron shouted, "I'm his son. I'm the heir." The Pacific Harvest representative looked him dead in the eye like he was staring at a child losing a toy. "You're not inheriting anything. Personal assets fall outside the company. And from what we understand, Mr. Hale has updated his estate plan." Aaron froze. His legs nearly gave out. The guards escorted him through the office, employees staring down at their desks, avoiding his eyes, not because they hated him, but because they were witnessing the collapse of someone who picked the wrong side. Aaron gathered a few photos, a watch, a mug that read, "Future CEO." One guard looked at it and murmured, not cruelly, just truth. "No more future CEO, man." Aaron ran out of the building, tears falling as he kept trying to call me. Call number 19. Call number 20. Call number 21. I let every one of them fall into silence. Each buzz felt like the final exhale of a father-son bond entering its last chapter, not because I wanted that, but because he had driven us here. At 6 p.m. that evening at an upscale bar in Columbus, Aaron met Gregory Lancaster. The bartender later told me, "Gregory slammed his glass down so hard it startled him. You let some old man from Ohio play you like that? 30 years of my plans ruined because of someone as incompetent as you." Aaron shook. "I didn't know he sold the company. I thought—" Gregory hissed. Thought? In my world, that word doesn't exist." He jabbed a finger at Aaron's face, voice like metal scraping stone. "You were fired because you're stupid. Got it? Because you're stupid." Sienna stood beside him, silent as a column of ice. When Aaron turned to her, pleading, "Sienna, I didn't mean, I just wanted—" She cut him off with a single line cold enough to end the rest of his life. "What do you have to offer now, Aaron?" No pity, no sigh, not even a blink, just one sentence. One sentence that severed his future. Aaron collapsed into the seat. Gregory stood, tossed the tip check onto the table like throwing out trash. "I'm done with this, and you're never stepping into the Lancaster house again." They walked out, leaving Aaron alone in the noisy bar, neon lights flickering across the stunned face of a man who had lost his company, his future, his support, and his would-be family in less than 8 hours. And I, locking my Euclid house door for the last time, looked at the key in my hand and understood. Revenge isn't an explosion. Revenge is silence. The silence of someone who has nothing left to lose and nothing left to explain. I left Ohio on a cold gray morning, the fog over Lake Erie lying across the water like a thin morning veil, the city wrapped around itself to see me off one last time. The old F-150 carried 3 boxes of books, a few sets of clothes, a framed photo of Margaret, and 1 small box holding whatever was left of 31 years of life. I left the rest behind, the company, the memories, the pain, and the son who no longer looked at me the way he once did. I drove through Indiana, Illinois, Nebraska, then Utah, crossing the Nevada ranges. When the tires finally touched the California coast, it felt as if I had driven out of winter and into another world entirely. A world of light, of salt, of wind strong enough to blow away half of what I had been carrying inside. 3 days later, I reached Monterey. The city greeted me with waves breaking against stone, the smell of the ocean in the air, and a kind of light I had never seen anywhere else. Golden, thin, warm enough to make a hardened man like me stop just to breathe. I rented a small, ocean-facing apartment on Lighthouse Avenue. 2 bedrooms, wide glass doors opening toward the water, a balcony looking straight out at the rocks where gulls perched each morning. On my first day, I dropped into the wooden chair by the window, opened everything wide, and let the ocean wind rush straight through the room. Salted wind, living wind, the wind of a new life I didn't yet understand, but felt like a release. In the mornings, I found a cafe near Old Fisherman's Wharf, Sea Lantern Cafe. Not crowded, not loud. The smell of coffee and the clatter of pans blended into a rhythm I didn't know I had missed. I chose the table by the window, set down a cappuccino, opened an old book, Margaret's Gift, a worn copy of East of Eden, and stayed until the sun crawled up the cafe wall. Every page felt like it touched something in me that had dried out long ago. I read slowly, not because it was hard, but because I couldn't remember the last time I'd read without being interrupted by meetings, invoices, or a grown son demanding I place the world beneath his feet. In the afternoons, I drove down to Big Sur. Highway 1 curled along the coast, each bend brushing the edge of the world. I stopped at a lookout, stepped out, and walked a narrow trail to a rocky point. Waves hit hard, spraying my shoes white. I closed my eyes, listened to the ocean. The ocean didn't know who I was, didn't care what I'd lost, but its indifference made me lighter. On one thin fogged morning there, I met Laura Bennett. She sat alone on a wooden bench, a wool scarf around her shoulders, holding the old man and the sea. She looked at the ocean the same way I did, not searching for anything, just letting it touch her. We only nodded, no questions, no forced friendliness. I passed her a few times, and one cool morning when I stopped nearby, Laura said softly, "The ocean's quieter today." Her voice was gentle, a little rough, as if carrying a thin layer of years. I answered, "Maybe the wind shifted." A small conversation began from the wind, not forced, not planned. I didn't ask her name that day. It took 3 encounters at the Sea Lantern Cafe before I learned she was Laura Bennett, 56, widowed 3 years from a heart condition that took her husband. You can recognize someone who knows grief, not fresh grief, but the kind that sleeps quietly until it turns in its sleep. We shared the kinds of stories people don't usually say out loud. I told her about Margaret, about the kind of long pain that seems to have no horizon. She told me about Mark, the man who loved photographing the sea, the man who died in her arms one February morning at their front door. We didn't pry into each other's wounds, didn't speak in dramatic emotions. Neither of us said, "I understand," because we both knew no one truly understands anyone. But each morning over coffee, each short hike in Big Sur, each evening on my balcony watching the moon fall into the water, I felt something in me stitching itself back together. Quietly, slowly, without fanfare. Laura had a way of sitting beside me without making me speak, a way of looking at the ocean as if that light was the only thing on earth that could never betray us. I realized the Monterey light had something in common with the cold of the freezer room in 1993 back in Ohio, a motif of my life. But instead of the cold that drove me to build an empire, the ocean light washed clean the broken pieces so I could start again. One evening, with the sun half sunk below the horizon, Laura asked quietly, "Do you think you'll ever love again?" I didn't answer right away, just looked at the water, then said slowly, honestly, "I'm not looking for love, but I know I don't want to live alone anymore." Laura said nothing, but her fingers brushed mine just for a second, enough to remind me I was still alive, still capable of feeling, still able to walk into a new chapter without betraying Margaret's memory. That night, for the first time in months, I slept through until morning. No dreams of Aaron, no ballroom darkness, no laughter of 250 people, only the ocean and light, the light of another life I never thought I'd reach at 63. Monterey didn't heal me in any miraculous way, but day by day it taught me something simple. Sometimes coming back to life isn't a victory. Sometimes coming back to life is just stopping the ways you hurt yourself. I grew used to the waves, the sea light, the quiet, a peace I'd never had in all my years in Ohio. I thought the past had finally settled, thought I had crossed into another chapter. But one noon, just as I stepped out of Sea Lantern Cafe, with Monterey sunlight gold on the small street, and the ocean breeze carrying a soft salt scent, my phone buzzed. An email from Fidel. Just one line, enough to pull the old world back up from the bottom of the water. "Mr. Hale, Sienna Lancaster filed to cancel the engagement this morning." And that was when I knew. Aaron's collapse had just officially begun. The first news I heard about Aaron after the months I'd left Ohio didn't come from him, but from a short email by Fidel, the old front desk kid who still treated me like Mr. Hale, from the days before everything cracked. That noon in Monterey, sunlight lay over the ocean like a thin gold sheet, but the line in the email was as cold as the freezer room in 1986. "Mr. Hale, Sienna Lancaster filed to cancel the engagement this morning." I stood frozen outside Sea Lantern Cafe, the cappuccino still hot in my hand while my palm turned cold. No surprise, no pain, just confirmation of what I had known for a long time. In the Lancaster world, a man without economic value is a man made invisible. In Columbus, Sienna's file said exactly 4 words: engagement terminated form. But in the Midwest business circle, Gregory said something else. He stood in the middle of a high-end networking event, a glass of red wine in his hand, and said loud enough for a dozen people to hear, "Aaron Hale is the only man I know who can lose an entire family company just by being stupid." The line spread faster than wind across Lake Erie. 3 days later, the entire Ohio, Michigan, Indiana logistics community knew Aaron wasn't just dumped. He was dragged so low, no one wanted to touch him. And then the real downfall began. Aaron applied to 14 logistics companies, big and small, from Cincinnati, Toledo, and Indianapolis to Detroit. All of them required references from his former employer, Hale Cold Chain Logistics, and Pacific Harvest sent exactly one line. Applicant was terminated with cause due to confidentiality breach. One sentence. One sentence that shut 14 doors, like 14 freezer doors slamming shut. And if that wasn't enough, the clip from the ballroom, the moment he said in front of 250 people that I couldn't even buy a candle for the cake, had reached more than 120,000 views. Any HR who searched Aaron Hale saw it instantly, along with comments like, "Never hire someone who humiliates their own parent. If he'll trash his dad publicly, what will he do to a company?" The result? No callback, no interview, not even one email reply. By the end of that month, Aaron had to vacate his luxury Columbus apartment. He sold his Mercedes GLC to pay legal fees tied to the canceled engagement. His savings were nearly gone because the investment he made with Gregory last year, a high-end textile venture, had collapsed, and the Lancasters blamed him entirely. Eventually, Aaron moved to Akron, renting a tiny studio, roughly 32 square meters, walls stained with watermarks, the only window facing an old gas station parking lot. One gray afternoon, the groundskeeper at Euclid Memorial Park called me. Her voice trembled. "Mr. Hale, your son is here. He's been sitting at Mrs. Margaret's grave since morning. He looks exhausted." I didn't answer right away. I looked out at the Monterey water, blue, calm, but inside me was the smell of wet Ohio cemetery soil. The groundskeeper continued. "He's talking to her. He keeps saying he's sorry. He says he lost everything. He says he wishes she were alive to tell him what to do." I closed my eyes. That pain didn't soften me. It just pressed down on my chest, like an old stone sinking on its own. Aaron knelt in the rain, a cheap bouquet of mums soaked through in his hands, his tears mixing with the rain running down his face. People say a man who has lost everything will break things, scream, rage, but Aaron didn't. He just sat, still, like a child lost on a road he no longer knew how to walk back from. Then he said a line. The groundskeeper herself had to wipe her eyes hearing it. "Mom, I made Dad disappear." I didn't go there, not because I hated him, because I knew if I showed up when he was falling, I would reach out and pull him up, and he would think the world owed him another chance. No. This time, he needed to stand up on his own, to look directly at the ashes he created, to walk back from the bottom he dug himself. That night, sitting in my Monterey apartment watching the ocean darken, I said only one thing, not to him, but to myself. Sometimes, to let someone return, you have to let them stay lost a little longer. And that was the first time in my life I felt I was letting Aaron face the truth instead of my softness. For many months after his collapse in Akron, my phone would buzz at strange hours, 1 in the morning, 4 in the afternoon, close to midnight. Each time it was just one short line from Aaron. "Dad, I was wrong. Dad, can I see you? Dad, I'm sorry. Dad, I just want to hear your voice once." I read every message, but I did not answer. Not to punish him, but because I knew any hasty reply would pull him back into an old habit, the habit of leaning on me to avoid facing himself. I let silence do what words could not, force him to stand, to look at the life he was living, to understand the price of losing a father's trust. Then one Monterey afternoon, the sky laying a pale gold sheet over the ocean, Laura trimming lavender in the yard, and I pouring myself a cup of hot tea, the phone buzzed again. A message from Aaron. Not long, not pleading. Just 3 words. "Dad, I'm tired." For the first time in many months, I felt that sentence wasn't about pity, not about money, not about demands. It was the breath of a man exhausted to the bone. I looked at the Monterey Sea for a long moment. The waves hitting the rocks reminded me that forgiveness isn't dragging someone back. It's opening a door so they can step out of their own darkness. I picked up the phone. For the first time after hundreds of messages, I replied, just one line. "Come to Monterey. See me once." After sending it, I set the phone down and felt as if I had closed a chapter so long it tired the whole soul. 3 days later, the doorbell rang. I opened the door. Aaron stood there, thin, hollow-eyed, sunburned face, hair tangled like someone who had walked through a war both sides lost. He looked at me for barely 2 seconds, his lips trembling like searching for words, but failing to form any. His knees buckled on the porch. The sound of them hitting the tile was sharp as a heartbeat cracking. "Dad." His voice shook and splintered like water-soaked rotten wood. Please, let me call you Dad one last time. I stood still. I didn't step forward. I didn't step back. I let him speak. Dad, I lost everything. I shamed you. I made even Mom disappointed if she were alive. Dad, I'm sorry. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm just asking you to hear me once. I took a slow breath, letting the sea breeze carry the heaviest part of my chest away. Then I spoke, not loudly, but with each word falling like the last stone, marking the end of a long road. Aaron, you didn't lose me. He lifted his head, eyes red, wet, shaking. I continued, slowly, clearly, saying what he should have heard long ago. You left me, years ago. His shoulders collapsed. He nodded. No arguing, no begging, just a nod, the kind a man gives when he finally sees his own wound for what it really is. I stepped closer. I didn't offer a hand to lift him, but I didn't step away either. I don't hate you, I said. I'm not holding you back. You have the right to go, but you also have the right to rebuild your life if you want to. It's just, you have to do that yourself. No one can do it for you. Aaron bit his lip, trying to hold back tears. I understand. Then he stood up. He didn't ask to hug me. He didn't ask when he could see me again. He just looked at me one last time, without arrogance, without fear, without trying to win. It was the look of a man accepting that sometimes you have to lose everything to know what you truly want. He turned around. His figure grew small along the path toward the beach, fading into the Monterey mist like a final period at the end of a long chapter. That night, I sat with Laura on the balcony, 2 cups of hot tea steaming between us, the ocean below shimmering with moonlight. No more screaming from the past, no more pain from the ballroom, no more haunting missed calls, only the sea, steady, deep, honest. My life settled into its new rhythm, volunteering to fix shelves at the Pacific Grove Senior Center, safe investments, reading with Laura, weekend walks in Big Sur, and learning to enjoy the simple things I never had time to see in the 30 years before. One evening, Laura asked me, "Do you think you did the right thing?" I watched the light on the water. "Yes," I said, "because I kept the one thing that matters." "What thing?" she asked softly. I looked out to the vast, borderless ocean and answered with the truth it took me a lifetime to learn. Dignity. And like a message to myself, and to anyone who has lost everything because of family, I closed the final chapter with the lesson Monterey taught me every day. Dignity is not negotiable, not even with your own blood. If you've listened this far, maybe you understand that sometimes what breaks a father isn't poverty or illness, but the moment his own blood looks down on him in front of strangers. And if you've been there, if your child, your kin, or someone you hope to protect pushed you into the dark, leave it below so I know this story reached the place it needed to reach. And if you want to hear more journeys where justice comes not through shouting, but through silence, through paperwork, through the final word carrying the weight of an entire life, I'd be grateful if you subscribed. So each week, when you open a new video, you can remember you're not alone in the fight to reclaim your dignity. Thank you for your time. I wish you a peaceful day, the kind you deserve.